Firearm violence has been increasing in the USA for more than a decade. This increase has disproportionately affected communities that have historically been impacted through a lack of economic investment and the structural discrimination that severely limits opportunities to address this violence. Because of this, the field of firearm injury prevention is in particular need of community-based interventions to address these disparities, address structural causes, and find solutions for the people that need them the most. Welcome to the Community Firearm Violence Prevention Network podcast. We are an NIH-funded research network that focuses on collaboration between academic and community organizations to address the public health crisis of firearm violence, focusing on community-level strategies to prevent firearm injuries and death. In today's episode, we will discuss the development of the community academic partnerships and the research project that make up the Community Firearm Violence Prevention Network. Our guests today are co-PIs Dr. Sandra McKay, Associate Professor at the McGovern Medical School at University of Texas Health Houston, and Dr. Alexander Testa, Assistant Professor at the School of Public Health at UTHealth Houston, along with Karlton Harris, Executive Director of the Forgotten Third and a community partner on the project in Houston, Texas. To start us off, please can you introduce yourselves and tell us about the community academic partnership you developed for this project?
Thanks for having us on. I'm Alex Testa. I'm one of the MPIs on the Houston Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Program. I'm an associate professor at University of Texas Health Science Center, Houston, in the School of Public Health. I'll just say briefly that I come at this as an academic researcher. A lot of my research prior to this program and still on this program has been community violence and firearm violence, the risk factors that kind of perpetuate violence and its concentration, but also trying to understand the collateral consequences of violence. It has this great opportunity to intervene to kind of mitigate those consequences and intervene in those risk factors to reduce the chance of recurrent violence.
Hi, I'm Sandra McKay. I am a general pediatrician and a physician scientist, and I'm the other MPI on this project with our Houston Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Program. And I am just really honored to be a part of this project and working with an incredibly collaborative team whose focus is really on the mission of reducing gun violence in our community. And I think some of the special things that Alex has already highlighted about our program is that we have a diverse team, bringing multiple different areas of expertise in to bring those different lenses of view. I have the lens of being a clinician as well. And so that brings me that perspective of the hospital-based view, as well as being researchers. I think the secret sauces to our program is that we're able to bring in a lot of different perspectives and being able to collaborate with people who are providing those various services, especially once people leave the hospital, because you don't live your whole life in the hospital, but being able to really help people. And that's really the focus of a program like this.
Hi, good afternoon. And I'm Karlton Harris. I'm the Executive Director of the Forgotten Third. We're the community partner of this partnership. We love doing community violence intervention and interruption. I've been doing this work for at least the last 14 years here in Houston. I've been here at the Forgotten Third for the last 3 years, where we pretty much focus on interrupting violence at its core roots by using a public health approach, looking at those risk factors, incorporating those protective factors, and then also just following that social ecological model, looking at the individual, relationship, community, and societal. Also focusing on the social determinants of health, which we understand also are contributing factors to violence in underserved communities that we primarily serve. I've known Dr. McKay for a while now. We've established a great partnership and relationship for the last 5-6 years.
What was it that led you to be involved in this area of research?
I got involved in this work, so it's personal to me. I used to be a perpetrator and also a victim of gun violence growing up on the south side of Chicago, former gang member. Ended up doing 6 years in prison. At the age of 19, I was sentenced to 18 years in prison for armed violence. Made a 180-degree change in my life while incarcerated. I dropped my gang affiliation. Went to college, got my associate's degree while I was in there. Upon release, I got my bachelor's degree in business. My prison sentence was eventually reduced from 18 years to 9 years. Went back to the judge and asked her if there's anything that I can do to give back to the community that I helped destroy. And she gave me an opportunity of working with juveniles who were involved in gang violence. So I started my mentorship program through that judge. And from there, eventually moved to Houston, 26 years. I've been out of prison and been doing this work ever since I got out, wanting to help young men who remind me of myself, who have good in them, but was just taught the wrong way by other individuals around them. So that's how I got involved in this work. This work is personal for me. I don't consider it hard work, H-A-R-D. I consider it heart work, H-E-A-R-T. You have to love the individuals, love to see them change, be able to work with them through the process, knowing they're going to be rough around the edges, but also knowing that that was once myself. I understand both sides and understand that this is a learned behavior, and that if we can teach these young men and young women something new and different regarding the way that they think, the way that they view life, increase those protective factors, then the outcome will be different. I believe that it's a purposeful, God-given assignment for me that I was almost killed through a drive-by shooting. So I truly personally believe that God had an angel there knocking those bullets down, keeping them away from me. And because he had a purpose and a plan for my life, which is to, interrupt violence at a community level, using my shared life experiences to help motivate, encourage young men who remind me of myself, see different in themselves for greatness that they can accomplish through increasing mentorship and those other protective factors that's so necessary to help them become successful.
Great life story, Karlton. It's very, very inspirational. We're happy to have you on as a community partner. My research focuses on two main areas, and I over time I came to realize that my interest probably became in them because they're kind of distinctly American US phenomenon and problems. So one area of research I do unrelated to this project is a lot of work on incarceration. The US has had the highest per capita incarceration rate in the world for decades. And then, on the other hand is gun violence. The US also has more guns than any other country in the world. And so I think I've often become interested in these social problems that are almost distinctly problems of the United States, and saying that other places in the world are able to structure well-functioning societies without having extremely high rates of incarceration and extremely high rates of firearm violence, then there must be a plausible solution that we can also find a level of incarceration that is more balanced, that balances public safety and the needs of the population, and find ways to reduce firearm violence that is consistent with the laws and the rights of gun owners of this country. As I gravitated into public health, I started to think more about that, criminal justice systems are limited and how much of a dent they can make in the problem of firearm violence. There are healthcare and hospital systems. There are community partners who can work in parallel with them. And in June 2022, I left my old job in a criminology and criminal justice department, and I came over to the School of Public Health at UTHealth. And within the first 2 weeks of me taking that job, two things happened. First, I decided to attend events at the Baker Institute that I heard about on firearm violence, just randomly. And there I met for the first time Sandra McKay, and, we had a nice chat. And then about a week after that, we were both on a Zoom call with a team of people who were having conversations, strategizing about applying for a grant for a hospital-based violence intervention program. Somehow, someone kind of voluntold Sandy and I that we'd be great two people to lead this project. We're coming on 3.5 years ago that occurred, and the rest is history.
My journey in becoming a firearm injury prevention researcher, I think, began back in the early 2010s. I've been a Missourian for the majority of my life. I've just been a Texan coming up on 10 years. And back in Missouri is really where I started in this world as really working in the policy arena, but, just honed in on my opportunity to advocate and to think about what is it that people were worried about? What is it that physicians were worried about? What is it that lawmakers were worried about? And started to delve into the issues a lot more as from a policy perspective, from a firearm owner perspective, from a physician perspective, and started to learn that there were just a lot of knowledge-based gaps from all the different levels. And that's really where the scientist in me started to think, well, wow, we need to start gathering a lot more information. We needed to start getting a lot more studies out there because there were just a lot of gaps. And that's really where a lot of my early work was founded more around how can we improve communication between physicians and firearm owners, and how can we do a better job at educating physicians on talking to firearm owners. And that's really where my work started. And I think one of my biggest passions outside of research is bringing communities together, bringing people together. And I think that's one of my strengths when it comes to grants is I'm kind of like the collaborator and the convener, and I like to bring teams together. And, Alex and I said, well, we're going to help write this grant. We're going to figure it out. And it sparked just a wonderful partnership and ability to really think more about a lot of the different players that needed to be there. And I think one of the different perspectives I like to bring is in medicine, it's really easy to get siloed, right? Because we tend to work in our own departments in our own regions, and they don't tend to collaborate as readily as they should because the system doesn't tend to set it up well to allow those collaborations easily. And so having a grant like this and having this opportunity really allows us to create a system that can, foster that collaboration where really the structure isn't there to support it as easily. And that's really the beauty of this, is being able to create something like that.
Can you describe the landscape of the communities that you work with doing this research?
So I'll go first. Landscape of the community is diverse. So we serve young adults all across Harris County, and we'll be moving into some other counties here soon. But our main priority is working with those who need the help. A lot of the communities that we work with experience those social determinants of health, struggles with accessing healthcare and, housing and employment opportunities. A lot of the young adults we work with come from single parent homes where mom is working 2 or 3 jobs just to try to make ends meet, and they're in survival mode. They don't know how to live. They have not experienced just living and thriving. So they've always been in survival mode. So those young men and young women we work with, they know what struggle is. They know what resiliency is. And we want to really just help them transition to a sense of normalcy. A lot of the communities, they've become desensitized to gun violence because it have become so normalized. And so we really help them see that, gun violence every single day is not something that should be considered normal. That is abnormal. It's not a thriving and a safe community. So a lot of our neighborhoods are unsafe. And so our main priority with those communities is just providing those resources, begin to interrupt violence at its core root, where it happens in the community, begin mediation and mentorship.
I was just going to also add, I think for those that might not know the greater Houston area, Houston's 4th largest city in America, just to kind of put that in context. The Texas Medical Center is where our study is housed. The Texas Medical Center is the largest medical center in the world. People come from all over the world to seek medical care here. So it's a world-renowned center. It has 2 level 1 trauma centers. So, everything just kind of funnels right into the center here. Access to care is pretty central here. So when people go back into their communities, sometimes it can be hard to access those resources once they've left the medical center. And that's the big challenge, is that geographic location too. I guess Houston is very large.
Just to, reiterate that when we look at the other, kind of really large cities on there, New York and Chicago, but it is a very different landscape out here, how cities develop versus they did in kind of the northern region of the country. And one of the important things is just the layout of the city, and how, despite being a very large city, there's not a strong public transportation system to get around. And so that those are all things that, certainly we are working with. We're thinking a lot about our program, but the great thing is we, very experienced people. And we have community partners like Karlton who spend a lot of time working in the neighborhoods that are experiencing disproportionate amounts of firearm violence. And we ends up having a deep knowledge about, the culture within those neighborhoods, what is needed to drive change, and kind of the resources that are available, and the barriers that people might face to get those resources.
And what do you see as the core need in this community?
One of the main things that we go for with a lot of our recruitment is making sure that we do a thorough assessment of their social determinants of health. And so bridging those gaps within the social determinants of health is a big one. So some of the core needs that we have are making sure people have working telephones, working cell phones, making sure that they have access to things like transportation, making sure that they can get to and from follow-up visits or doctor's visits, housing needs, social service needs, making sure insurance is available, especially for patients that are over 18. Our current HVIP service is 16 to 35. So it's kind of working through the program eligibility requirements are there, but it's about being able to contact people when we can, having a mechanism to be able to contact them, have a way to reach them, making sure that they have those abilities to be able to just get basics, just to get them kind of moving with their life forward and even understanding like what is available to them as well. So I think it's just a lot of those hurdles to jump through, all in the midst of, oh, by the way, you're recovering from a firearm injury, from gunshot wound, just like throw that little kink into there. And it's a challenge for people to just navigate this system. And so being able to have someone that can help them with that system navigation on top of that. And if you don't have a reliable way to reach somebody, that can be, hard, especially for our case managers.
One thing I will say that we saw certainly when we did a pilot phase of this, and we're seeing now that we've enrolled several dozen individuals into the trial, is the economic need, and both prior to and after the gun violence incident being an important factor. A lot of people are coming with very little financial means to start with, and then I think also suffering a serious injury, especially like a gunshot injury, exacerbates that economic need in all sorts of ways, with accumulating medical bills and with loss of work, sometimes for extended periods of time due to physical injury, potential mental trauma. And I think that the goal is to kind of help stabilize somebody's life and keep them out of recurrent violent injury. I think that's become a really, important component. And we're definitely looking for levers to do that in a variety of ways. But I know the crime victims compensation has been used quite extensively in our program as a way to at least kind of try to help offset some of that economic burden that individuals are facing.
Anything additional that I can probably add to it is access to trauma-informed care. These are traumatic experiences, being wounded and experiencing firearm violence, just the psychological effect that it have on you, and needing to go through therapy and having a therapist that can relate to your circumstances and being able to walk them through the victim compensation process and making sure they understand it. And when they're denied, I think one of the struggles is if law enforcement feel as though they're not participating in the investigation or helping them find who the perpetrator was. Oftentimes I've seen their victim compensation be denied, and helping them go through those hurdles in the appeals process, helping them find access to rental assistance, right? We have some of them now that they're laying in a bed. I think Dr. Testa said this best is, losing income. And so that in of itself is now an additional weight on his shoulders, trying to figure things out and work through those barriers that exist. So I think that the main need is, of course, all those, social determinants of health, getting those access to things that are necessary, but then also finding those financial resources and those mental health resources to deal with the traumatic experience that they've gone through, so that they can feel safe again, feel comfortable again. And that's a process. That's not something that happens overnight, being comfortable enough to go back outside. I know personally, the first time I experienced gun violence, I witnessed 3 individuals being shot and killed, and I was the 4th one that was there. And that's another time that God spared my life. But the very next day I was outside and the car backfired. It was just from the muffler. The way I ducked and rolled and the way I panicked was just unexplainable, right? And so not knowing about therapy, a lot of underserved communities, especially Black and brown individuals, there's a stigma on therapy in these communities, and that needs to be addressed, that it's okay to sit down and talk to somebody. It's okay to have a counselor and a therapist. That is a huge need when you experience gun violence.
We've learned how the partnership developed, as well as gaining some insight into the community that they work with every day. Now let's learn a little bit more about the project that they have proposed. Please, can you explain the project that you have proposed?
So we decided to take a little bit of a different take to our project because we wanted to make sure we maintained the scientific rigor as well. So we are set up as a randomized controlled trial having two different approaches. So we have patients that are eligible to enroll into our study based off of if they are a victim of a gunshot wound and if they fit certain eligibility criteria. Okay. And then they are randomized into two levels, whether that they are kind of a high touch or a low touch type of an intervention, whether they enroll into like a 2-week intervention with us, which is considered kind of our low touch intervention, or if they enroll into our high touch, which is a 6-month intervention with us. And then, with that 6-month intervention, they'll be meeting and working with our case management team, and then they will undergo a risk assessment score. And with that determines whether or not they are also referred to our community partner with Karlton based off of certain risk factors that would qualify them for Karlton services as well.
And so really a lot of what we're testing there is whether delivery of more intensive case management versus kind of standard care. So one where our kind of main objective is looking at recurrent violence and particularly firearm violence. So we're tracking people over the course of a year post enrollment, and we're consistently surveying them, but we're also checking other things like health system records for people represented to the hospitals in the area with an injury, as well as mortality records. But also, I think what makes our program important in, where a lot of the hospital-based violence intervention literature from a research standpoint hasn't been in the past, is we're looking at a lot of secondary outcomes, looking at if people's health improves, if their mental health and things like PTSD get better, if their attitudes toward violence change, right? And so a host of kind of secondary outcomes, because I think that the work we're doing, the mentorship that they're receiving with case managers and are working with the Forgotten Third, right, has that opportunity to protect them, give them the skills that they need, the tools that they need to not experience violence again in the future. Houston had, up until recently, no hospital-based violence intervention program, with a lot of cities relied overwhelmingly on, a narrow swath of its tools to intervene in community violence. And largely that was through criminal justice and law enforcement. And I think that by getting these very large hospitals that see just tremendous amounts of people every year and see hundreds of gunshot victims every year, if you start delivering resources to those people, hundreds and hundreds of people every year, and you do that year after year, I think that done at a scale large enough eventually over time where that can impact community violence, but it also, I think, importantly helps build a new layer of trust between individuals and the hospital system, right?
And the only thing that I will add is that it can interrupt violence and prevent the retaliation, right? So that the violence doesn't perpetuate into the community and continue in the community. And now you begin to get individuals to put their guns down and pick up education and employment opportunities that are available for them. I think that as we continue to help and serve our communities in a holistic way, we'll continue to minimize the retaliation that occurs from gun violence, as well as also help the young adults that we work with.
I think the only other thing that I would add to these, wonderful statements here would be, as we start to see the downward impact of these types of programs, we start seeing less violence, and then the economic costs to the regions are improved, right? And so you have to consider those costs to the healthcare systems when people do return as violently re-injured patients. Those are enormous costs to healthcare systems. And so demonstrating those benefits to healthcare systems is critical. Other healthcare systems can also see those benefits and start to see those modelings in other systems across other regions.
Can you tell us what you think this kind of research project brings to the field of firearm violence prevention research?
I think one of the great things about this, and even all the projects coming out of this Community Firearm Violence Prevention Network, is that firearm violence, despite the large public health problem it is, there's been a kind of a lack of research on it, especially due to long periods without any funding toward it. And when you actually look into the hospital-based violence intervention literature in particular, despite the fact that these programs are popping up more and more each year, more and more hospitals are adapting them, we kind of have relatively limited knowledge about the best practices and their effectiveness. And you even really look at the number of randomized control trials that have been done and the number of adequately powered randomized control trials there, it's almost non-existent. And so I think about one of the really exciting things that we have, especially being in a very large city with a very high volume hospital, is that when our study is all said and done, we'll be able to produce one of the largest randomized control trials of a hospital-based violence intervention done to date. And our hope is to be able to put out information, lots of new information in the research literature about kind of the best practices behind hospital-based violence intervention programs and their effectiveness, both on recurrent violence, but again, also, like I said, a lot of those health and social determinant of health factors we're also going to be looking at.
Now, I would just add, research data is everything. I mean, doing the research in the communities that we serve, having that data to make data-informed decisions and not just speculating or guessing what works and what doesn't work. Looking at other communities that have implemented similar programs and the effectiveness of those programs. But looking at the data and the research in the community, knowing what the community need, I think is groundbreaking. That's phase 0, because research is everything. And having that research done first that Dr. Testa and Dr. McKay has done allowed for us to be able to say, this is what the data is saying. And these are the approaches and the strategies that we need to take in order to reduce firearm violence and also provide the adequate resources and supports and services that the survivors need in these communities. So research is everything.
I will just briefly highlight Karlton, how he was so accurate in saying we really took a more of a community-based approach with this project instead of, in taking that time. That's what this grant mechanism allowed us to do with a kind of a ramp-up period, and really allowing us to do that research to engage the community and really use that community-based approach to this project rather than, kind of having to implement right away, and having that time to be able to convene a community advisory board, be able to take our metrics and go to the community and do that engaged approach really allows us to have a stronger mechanism and to really be able to make sure that our approach is best for the community and the person.
How is being in a network supporting the work that you do?
I think the network has allowed us to collaborate with other people that have gone down this road a little bit before us, as well as, help us collaborate on things like consultations on study design, learn from other institutions that have walked down that same road and learn a little bit from their experience so that we can develop similar strategies, especially as we've reached into through those roadblocks. It's also helped us develop different metrics and maybe look at how we can look at some of the things that we want to evaluate and, have that support system in place for when we do have questions. The nice thing about the network is it also allows a structure for us to have, a similar set of metrics to compare across other places that are doing similar work. So that way now we can have a shared approach to our evaluations and really kind of, collate that data and really, have a higher amplification for what our evaluations are. So we can get some really interesting information at the end of the study as well.
Yeah, it's offered, a tremendous amount of benefits. One of the things also has been just really helpful is providing, access and, getting to also just see in live time the development of a number of really innovative programs across the country in very different settings, and being able to learn and adapt our own practices from what others have done, what they've found works, what they found hasn't worked, being able to kind of regularly meet and talk about that, I think has been incredibly important.
Yeah, and for us, I would say looking at what other community partners are doing, I think is very informative for us. And, especially working with other HVIP programs, some may be taking a different approach, but it's always good to learn from others, right? We don't have all the answers. And, our main philosophy is we do it better together. So learning from one another, iron sharpens iron. So that's been very beneficial and one of the key components of the network. Us coming together, convening, once a year, having monthly meetings. I think that really helps us, especially for the community academic partnership.
Finally, can you tell us how other communities with high rates of violence will benefit from the work of this project if it is found to be successful?
Yeah, I think the big benefit here, again, like I was saying, is violence and firearm violence strikes every community, every city, every, corner and dot of the country. You can look at a map of where shootings occur, and nowhere is immune from them. And so everyone is looking at how to kind of respond to this. I think being in a large metropolitan area, our study becomes also generalizable probably to other large cities. Since starting this project, one of the big benefits that we offer to other communities is being able to put out a roadmap of a couple of things, of a design of a program, to say this is the services we offered and how we offered them, and then this is the measurable effect that they had, and so that makes it easier for other places to open them. But also, I think putting this evidence out there helps other hospitals decide if they're going to invest in them, because that's also been a very hard part. A lot of places want to start these, but when they bring it up and they have to get the actual dollar investment into it, there's a question of, well, is this program's going to work? What is the expected effect we would see? And without the research, then the people have to go out and they say, well, we don't really know, because there hasn't been research before, and that can be very hard to get people to sign off on it. So I think that research, puts it out there, gives people an estimate that says, yes, there's a very credible estimate from a randomized control trial that says that this program, we don't know what our effects would be, but can achieve X, Y, and Z, and that will help these programs potentially show up in other cities, as well as the materials we'll be able to put out in the broader network for a clear roadmap of how you start these programs, what are the best practices, and things of that nature. And so we would be really excited not only to see this program become established here in Houston, but similar programs emerge in other cities as well.
I think one of the things that Alex alluded to that I think was really just unspoken about, other communities can benefit from when you do well. And so you really do see other people from other institutions say, I can help. Let me see how can I do anything to support you? And it's just really great to see how a whole, firearm research community can really just get behind your study. And when your study does well, you can help others see how you can help implement and help them be successful as well.
They hit the nail on the head again. All I can say is collaboration, not competition. It's all about us collaborating with each other to see each other do better, because it's all about the community that we serve, right? So it's not about us competing with, other communities. It's about us thriving so we can help other communities thrive. The residents and the community members that we serve are the ones who benefit, and they're our focus. And as we come together and collaborate, we have that collective impact model, which is what it's all about, taking what we learn here, our shared life experiences and our expertise, and helping someone else become better. And the same, goes for them helping us become better. So, because at the end of the day, the community win, and that's what we want.
Thank you both for explaining the projects and how it will make a lasting impact on the field of firearm violence prevention research. Thank you for listening to the Community Firearm Violence Prevention Network podcast. To learn more about the Community Firearm Violence Prevention Network, go to endfirearmviolence.org.